Hello, my name is Ross Haber, and I want to thank you for checking out my first tutorial video on audio and mixing concepts. In this video, I'm going to show you how I like to pan tracks when I mix. Except for rare occasions, I like to pan every single track to one of three places: straight down the center, hard left, or hard right. This concept is commonly referred to as LCR panning. Additionally, I'm going to go over what the stereo field is, what the phantom image is, and how pan pots work to create the phantom image. Now, I have found that most people do not accept or find it hard to accept the concept of LCR panning and always debate me as to its legitimacy. I mean, I understand, I get it. Most people have been taught to use the pan pots to fill up the entire width of the stereo field. This includes me as well. I mean, every music production class I've taken, every book I have read, and every video tutorial I have seen on mixing and panning have always said the same thing. And when you think about it, the logic of it makes perfect sense. Pan instruments all across the stereo field. So for quite some time, I panned my tracks just like that. Some instruments went right up the center, others slightly left, others halfway right, etc., etc. Then I was introduced to the concept of LCR panning by Graham Cochran at therecordingrevolution.com and decided to give it a shot. And let me tell you, it has done wonders for my mixes. So what I hope you will learn from this video is that there are different approaches when it comes to panning. LCR panning works for me, but it may or may not work for you. I hope that you will, at minimum, give it a try. If it's not for you, just go back to what does work for you. Remember, there are no rules when it comes to mixing. I'm not saying that my way is the correct way of doing it and yours is wrong. I'm just trying to show you my preferred philosophy so that you can see a different approach. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we jump into LCR panning, I want to go over some basic concepts of how stereo works. You probably already know most of the stuff, so I'll try to run through it as quickly as I can. Let's begin with the stereo field. Now, when I say stereo field, I'm referring to the two speakers you are using to listen to your mix and the entire space in between them. The space in between your two speakers is what provides us with the stereo effect that we love so much. The foundation behind that stereo effect is what is known as the phantom image. The phantom image is that sound that's hovering in between the two speakers of a stereophonic system. This phantom image is the product of some rather elaborate mental operations by the auditory mechanism and the brain. It's a fascinating topic in case you're interested. Now, let's discuss the role pan pots play in all this. We have a tendency to believe that the phantom image follows the pan pot on a mixing console so that when we turn the pan pot a little to the left, the image moves to the left as well. But what you have to remember is that the pan pot is nothing more than two volume controls in one. One volume control for the left speaker, one volume control for the right speaker, and they are wired in reverse so that as you turn up the volume to one speaker, the other speaker decreases in volume. So the whole effect of panning is achieved simply by changing the relative volume level of each speaker. We basically trick our brain into believing that the sound is emanating from a specific place within the stereo field. For example, if you are listening to this video through a pair of speakers, you will notice that my voice appears to be coming from straight ahead of you. But how can that be since there are no speakers directly in front of you? It is because the signal is coming from both of your speakers at the same volume level. This is tricking your brain into believing that I am right in front of you. When dealing with the stereo field, just remember that it's all smoke and mirrors. It's all magic tricks. The reality is that regardless of where you might pan the tracks in your mix, there is ultimately only two places the sound can go: the left speaker and the right speaker. Now that you understand how panning works, let's take a closer look at LCR panning. LCR stands for left, center, and right. And just as you would expect, that means that each pan pot has only three positions that it can be in: hard left, dead center, or hard right. Now, the concept of LCR panning stems from vintage mixers of the 60s and 70s. Mixers like the API 1608, the Neve EMI, and the RTW12 all were designed with switches, not pan pots, but switches that could be only in one of those three positions. LCR panning was widely used by mix engineers. In fact, the chances are pretty high that every single hit classic song that you can possibly think of was mixed using LCR panning. Even today, LCR panning is designed into many mixing consoles, particularly mixers designed for use at live performance venues. When I first tried LCR panning in a mix, I personally loved the way it sounded. You might try it and absolutely hate the way it sounds. Of course, on the other hand, you might try it and absolutely love it. I mean, it's all just a matter of preference and taste. Now, one of the most common criticisms I hear regarding LCR panning is, but I can hear the phantom image move as I pan my tracks, and I want other people to hear the same thing. That's why I spend hours finding that perfect spot in the stereo field for each instrument. Well, it's commendable that you passionately want to create a mix that wows people with this perfect stereo placement. The problem is that the majority of listeners are not sitting right in the sweet spot like you are. Most people don't place themselves equidistant from their speakers. No. Most people listen to their music in their cars, for example, where you are always closer to one speaker than the other. And unfortunately, moving as little as 1 inch from the sweet spot renders the stereo signal null, and it turns into a form of indirect mono. Other people may be listening at home but are doing something else, like cleaning the house or watching TV, and are therefore not paying close enough attention to the mix to hear the subtle panning decisions that you made. Same thing happens when they're at the gym or out jogging with some headphones on. There are distractions that keep them from focusing in on the music. My point is that the hours spent meticulously micro-panning every instrument will likely never be heard by anyone except the mix engineer. Those hours spent panning could be better spent tweaking other aspects of the mix in order to wow the listener. Another thing to remember is that as mix engineers, it is our job to combine all of the tracks that are given to us and create a mix where there is separation amongst the instruments so that each one can be heard clearly. Some instruments may be louder than others in the mix, and that's okay. But it is our job to make sure that each instrument can be heard and isn't being masked by other instruments. One of the tools at our disposal to help us create that separation is panning. Now, I like to pan all the important instruments down the center. Things like the kick drum, the snare drum, and the bass are typically the instruments that lay the foundation for most songs, so I pan them right in the center. The lead vocal is the driving force behind most modern music, so it gets placed right in the center as well. Since these are the most important tracks in the mix, I don't want anything else to cover them up. So, why not pan all the other tracks as far away from them as possible? Get them far away from your important tracks so that they can do their job without having to fight other instruments for the same sonic space. Not to mention, by only having 3 pan positions, you force yourself to achieve separation through other means, such as EQ, which yields more stability in the separation as well as a sound that translates better on various sound systems. Just to give you a second opinion on why you might want to give LCR panning a chance, let me briefly tell you about an experiment performed by Grammy-nominated engineer Dave Moulton, director of Moulton Laboratories. He's also an audio engineer, author, composer, educator, and acoustician, and also the former chairman of music production and engineering at the Berklee College of Music in Boston. Mr. Moulton was asked to do an experiment where he would listen to a tone and point out the location of the phantom image created by that tone. Each tone was panned 1/10 of a decibel to the left further than the tone before it. The results of the experiment shocked Mr. Moulton. He concluded that a tone that is panned up to 3 decibels in either direction created a phantom image that hardly moved from the center or at most about 5 degrees. Beyond 3 dB, the image shifts tremendously and hovers just inside the more dominant speaker. Once panned to 7 decibels or greater, the image closes the tiny gap and comes from the dominant speaker altogether. In the end, he stated, and I quote, "The principle of mixing I've evolved from this is that there are only 3 panning positions: left, center, and right. Within those zones, the pan pots yield a little sense of localization shift, but mostly it isn't stable, and moving my head by an inch or so screws it up. It isn't very reliable, and I can't count on that localization detail being there in playback away from the studio." Now, something else I hear a lot from people is that by using LCR panning, I am leaving huge gaps in the stereo field. What I mean is, If you were to start from the left speaker and travel around to the right speaker, you would hear sound, silence, sound, silence, sound. Well, this is true, but there are ways to fill in those sonic gaps. One of those ways involves the use of delay lines, which can fill in the mix and are much more stable and reliable than pan pots, but that will be discussed in another video. Now, like I said earlier, I do not use LCR panning all of the time. There are some situations that I do believe call for the more conventional method of panning. One example would be when I am creating drum tracks from scratch using MIDI. To give you an idea as to what I mean, if I were to pan the hi-hat hard right, the drums would sound weird and would be a dead giveaway that they aren't being played by anyone real. When you record a drum kit, the majority of the sounds are captured in the overheads, and any spot mics you might have used are simply for beefing up certain parts of the kit. Well, both overheads pick up a portion of the kit's sounds depending on the proximity of each drum to the overhead. This means that a naturally recorded drum kit never has anything recorded by just one of the overheads. So when I'm creating drum tracks using MIDI, it makes sense not to pan any of the sounds hard left or right. Another situation where I might not pan things to the extremes is when there is minimal instrumentation. For example, an alternative rock band that I recently recorded wanted to record a couple of songs that had an acoustic guitar and a vocalist. That's it. If there had been a couple more instruments, I would have panned the guitar mono or hard left and hard right. But because the guitar is the only instrument in the song, panning it hard left and right would have produced an unnatural sounding guitar, with all the body of the guitar coming from the left speaker and all the fingering coming from the right. Now, we don't hear a guitar like that, so it makes sense not to pan it that way. In this case, I panned the guitar to around 10 and 2 o'clock positions. This narrowed the stereo width of the song, but it allowed the guitar to sound natural. Now, there's another situation where I will not use LCR panning, and it is very, very important that I don't whenever the situation comes up. It's simply whenever my ears tell me not to. At the end of the day, it is our job as mix engineers to create a mix that simply sounds good. A good sounding song is very subjective, and what sounds good to me might not sound good to you, or vice versa. But the only way you are going to create a mix that sounds good is if you trust your ears. If I have something panned hard right or hard left, but when I listen to it in context, if it doesn't sound like it belongs panned hard right or hard left, then I will pan it to wherever it needs to go for my ears to tell me, there! That sounds good, right there. Trust your ears and don't second guess what they are telling you. Then, and only then, will you be able to create a mix that sounds good. Well, that's going to do it for this video, folks. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I hope that you found something in this video that will be useful to you and will help you create better mixes. Remember, there are no rules in mixing, no right way or wrong way. There are only philosophies and points of view. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, feel free to drop me an email at djrhfactor@hotmail.com. Again, my name is Ross Haber. Thanks for checking out the video, and hope to see you next time.